Commander Grix stood in the center of Galactic Security Station Omega Prime's main command hub, their four compound eyes twitching in what could only be described as barely contained panic. The holographic displays around them flickered with impossible data, the kind of information that made seasoned galactic security officers question their career choices and possibly their sanity. "Run it again," Grix commanded, their mandibles clicking in agitation. The tactical officer, a nervous centaurian with tentacles that kept curling and uncurling in distress, manipulated the holographic interface. "Sir, the readings are consistent across all sensor arrays. Biosignature confirmed. One human female, alive and, well, apparently thriving on Kepler 438b. Now, for those keeping score at home, Kepler 438b wasn't exactly what you'd call a vacation destination. It was the kind of planet that featured prominently in How Not to Die Horribly in Space training modules across the galaxy. Dense forests, unpredictable weather patterns, and, oh yes, home to the apex. The apex. Just thinking their name made most spacefaring species check their insurance policies and update their wills. Picture, if you will, what would happen if someone took a grizzly bear, gave it the hunting intelligence of a velociraptor, the pack coordination of wolves, and then made it about twice as large and infinitely more creative in its killing methods. Then, just for fun, made them excellent parents who became absolutely homicidal when protecting their young. "Show me the timeline again," Grix muttered, rubbing their temples, all four of them. The hologram shifted, displaying a chronological breakdown that would have been hilarious if it weren't so terrifying. Day 1. Human terraforming engineer crashes on Kepler 438b during peak apex breeding season. Any reasonable being would assume that was the end of the story, possibly accompanied by some very unpleasant digestive noises. Day 2. Biosignature still active. Odd, but stranger things had happened. Maybe she'd found a cave. Maybe the apex were full from a recent hunt. Day 3. Still alive. And here's where it got weird. Sensor readings indicated she wasn't hiding. She was moving around. Freely. "This has to be a sensor malfunction," Corvin interjected from his station. The young mammalian officer's ears were flat against his skull, a sure sign of stress. "No one survives 3 days on an apex world. No one." Grix's laugh was the sound of grinding metal. "Corvin, my naive friend, you're forgetting something crucial about humans." "What's that, sir?" "They have this absolutely infuriating habit of surviving things that should, by all known laws of physics and common sense, kill them dead." The rescue ship had found her sitting by her crashed vessel. Not hiding in it, mind you, but sitting outside it like she was waiting for a taxi. When they'd approached, expecting to find trauma, injury, or at the very least a severe case of shock-induced babbling, they'd instead found a perfectly calm human female who'd asked if they'd brought coffee. Coffee. 3 days on a death world. And she'd wanted coffee. Captain Rowan, as she'd introduced herself, was a terraforming engineer who'd been conducting routine atmospheric processor maintenance when her ship decided to demonstrate the fundamental unreliability of technology at the worst possible moment. Standard protocol demanded an immediate evacuation from apex territory, preferably while screaming. Instead, they'd found her with dirt under her fingernails, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been through a forest adventure, and sporting what could only be described as the kind of deep, restful tan that came from spending quality time outdoors. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice cracked slightly, "the preliminary medical scan came back. And? She's healthier than when she crashed. Heart rate normal, stress hormones actually lower than baseline, and The officer paused, tentacles writhing in confusion. And she appears to have gained weight. Grix felt something that might have been an aneurysm starting behind their left secondary eye. She gained weight, on a planet where the primary inhabitants consider everything else a potential snack. Yes, sir. And her story? That's where it gets interesting, sir. Oh, wonderful. Because what this situation really needed was more interesting elements. The human, Rowan, had been remarkably unhelpful during initial questioning. When asked how she'd survived, she'd simply smiled and said, "The cubs kept me safe." When pressed for details, she'd elaborated with all the helpfulness of a particularly stubborn asteroid. Their mothers didn't mind. Their mothers didn't mind. As if the galaxy's most notorious super predators were running some kind of interspecies daycare program. "Bring her in," Grix commanded. "Full debriefing protocol." "Sir, she's already on her way up. Security escort reports she's been chatty." "Chatty how?" "She's been asking about the dietary restrictions of various species on the station, sir. Something about making sure everyone gets fed properly." Grix's mandibles stopped clicking. In the sudden silence, the only sound was the gentle hum of life support systems and Corvin's increasingly rapid breathing. "She's been asking about feeding schedules," Grix repeated slowly. "Yes, sir." "After 3 days on an apex world." "Yes, sir." "Where the primary survival strategy of every known species is run very fast and pray." "That would be correct, sir." Somewhere in the depths of the station, a transport tube chimed softly, indicating an arriving passenger. Grix straightened their uniform and tried to remember their conflict resolution training. How exactly did one interrogate someone who'd apparently turned a death sentence into a casual camping trip? The command hub doors slid open with a soft whisper, and in walked the most relaxed human Grix had ever seen. Rowan was average height for her species, with brown hair that looked like it had been styled by a friendly breeze, and clothes that bore the telltale signs of recent outdoor activity. She looked around the command center with the kind of mild curiosity typically reserved for touring a museum. "Wow," she said, her voice carrying that distinctly human quality of finding wonder in the mundane. "This place is amazing. How do you keep the gravitational systems balanced with so many different species requirements?" Grix stared at her. Here was a being who'd just survived the impossible, and she was asking about engineering specifications. "Captain Rowan," Grix began, using their most official tone, "you do realize you've just spent 3 days on one of the most dangerous worlds in this sector?" Rowan's face lit up with what could only be described as genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, absolutely! It's incredible down there. The ecosystem balance is just fascinating. I've never seen such successful apex predator integration with environmental sustainability. The way they manage their hunting grounds is remarkably sophisticated." She spoke about the apex the way a xenobiologist might discuss an interesting species of butterfly. Corvin made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a growl. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the apex have a 100% fatality rate for non-indigenous contact." "Well," Rowan said cheerfully, "I guess that makes me pretty special then, doesn't it?" And there it was, that uniquely human combination of obliviousness and stubborn pride that had somehow carried their species from a single world to half the galaxy. Grix felt their compound eyes beginning to twitch again. "Indeed," Grix said dryly, "quite special. Which is exactly why we need to understand how you manage this particular miracle." "Oh, that's easy," Rowan replied, settling into the chair they offered with the comfort of someone who'd never met a situation she couldn't handle. "I just helped out with the kids, and their moms appreciated it. You know how it is with parents. They'll do anything for someone who's good with their babies." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either profound enlightenment or complete mental breakdown. In the command hub of Omega Prime, it was definitely leaning toward the latter. "The Cubs," Grix said slowly, "guarded you." "That's right." "From their parents?" "Well, more like their parents guarded all of us, but yes, essentially. All of us. Me and the Cubs, obviously. We were a package deal by day 2. Grix looked around the command center, noting the expressions of their crew. Corvin appeared to be having some kind of existential crisis. The tactical officer's tentacles had gone completely still. Never a good sign. And even the usually unflappable duty roster coordinator was staring at Rowan like she'd just announced she was personally related to a black hole. "Captain Rowan," Grix said, carefully, "I think we need to have a very long, very detailed conversation." "Sure thing," Rowan replied brightly. "But first, do you happen to have any coffee? It's been a really long couple of days." As if surviving the unsurvivable was just the kind of minor inconvenience that required a good cup of coffee to set right. Grix was beginning to understand why humans had such a reputation for giving the rest of the galaxy stress-related medical conditions. Briefing Room C was designed for serious conversations, the kind where careers ended and galactic incidents got swept under very large, very classified rugs. The walls were a soothing, neutral gray that psychologists insisted would promote honest communication, though Grix suspected they'd never tested it on someone who'd apparently befriended the galaxy's most efficient killing machines. Rowan sat across from them, cradling a steaming mug of what she'd declared to be surprisingly decent coffee for a space station. She looked completely at ease, as if this were a pleasant social call rather than what was rapidly becoming the most baffling debriefing in galactic security history. Dr. Nathari materialized at the table, literally since her crystalline form occasionally flickered in and out of visible spectrum depending on her emotional state. Currently, she was a steady blue-green, which indicated intense curiosity mixed with profound skepticism. Her voice, when she spoke, had the musical quality of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Captain Rowan, I am Dr. Nathari, xenobiological specialist and behavioral analyst. I must confess, your survival presents certain logical challenges." "Oh, I love logic puzzles," Rowan said brightly. "Fire away." Corvin, who had positioned himself by the door as if ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, pulled out a data pad. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the sensor logs from your crash. The impact signature suggests catastrophic engine failure, followed by uncontrolled descent through severe atmospheric disturbance. Survival probability calculations put your chances at approximately 0.003%, Nathari interrupted, her form flickering slightly. "And that's assuming optimal emergency protocols, which our data suggests were not followed." Rowan nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, the landing was pretty rough. I definitely didn't stick it like I wanted to. But you know what they say. Any crash you walk away from is a good one." "Walk away from," Grix repeated slowly. "You walked away from a crash that should have been unsurvivable, on a planet where everything wants to eat you, during breeding season when the apex are at their most territorial and aggressive." "Well, I didn't exactly walk immediately," Rowan admitted. "More like crawled at first. The landing knocked the wind out of me something fierce." The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the environmental systems. Three of the galaxy's most experienced security professionals stared at a human who was describing near death as a minor inconvenience. "Captain," Nithari said, her voice taking on the carefully patient tone usually reserved for explaining basic physics to particularly slow students. "Perhaps you don't fully understand what the apex represent. They are apex predators in the truest sense. Perfectly evolved killing machines with no natural enemies, highly developed pack intelligence, and territorial instincts so strong they've been known to attack starships that venture too close to their nesting grounds." "Oh, I know all about them," Rowan replied cheerfully. "Required reading for terraforming engineers working anywhere near apex territory. Fascinating species, really. Did you know their social structure is actually more complex than most galactic civilizations? The hierarchy isn't just based on strength. There's this whole intricate system of family relationships, territory rights, and resource management. It's like a soap opera, but with more teeth." Corvin's ears had gone completely flat against his skull. "Ma'am, that may be true, but it doesn't explain how you survived first contact. The apex kill first, and never bother with questions later." "Well," Rowan said, taking another sip of coffee, "that depends on the circumstances, doesn't it?" Grix felt their patience beginning to fray. What circumstances could possibly make the galaxy's most notorious predators decide not to immediately eviscerate a crash survivor? The Cubs were in trouble. The simplicity of the statement hung in the air like a confession. 4 words that somehow made everything both clearer and infinitely more confusing. "Elaborate," Nithari commanded, her crystalline form now pulsing with intense curiosity. "When I crawled out of the wreckage, I heard these sounds, kind of like chittering mixed with distress calls. I know I should have run, but—" Rowan shrugged, as if what came next was the most obvious thing in the universe. "They sounded scared." "They sounded scared," Grix repeated flatly. "Terrified, actually. So I followed the noise." "You followed," Corvin said weakly, "the sounds of distressed apex cubs. Right into what was obviously their territory. During breeding season. When their mothers would be most protective." "Exactly." Rowan beamed at them like they'd finally grasped a particularly simple concept. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications, none of them good for galactic understanding of basic survival instincts. Dr. Nithari's form flickered rapidly, a sure sign of computational overload. "Captain, you do realize that approaching apex young is considered the most effective form of suicide in 17 different galactic cultures?" "Well, that seems a bit dramatic," Rowan said mildly. "I mean, they're just babies. Really big, really dangerous babies. But still, just babies," Grix muttered, wondering if humans had some kind of species-wide death wish disguised as maternal instinct. "The thing is," Rowan continued, seemingly oblivious to the existential crisis she was causing, 3 of them had gotten trapped under some debris from my crash. The impact had brought down this massive tree, and they were stuck underneath it, crying for their mothers. And you decided to help them." "Of course I did. What kind of person hears babies in distress and just walks away?" The answer, Grix thought grimly, would be the kind of person who wants to continue existing. But they kept this observation to themselves. "Captain," Dr. Nithari said carefully, "the maternal protection instincts of apex females are legendary. They've been known to pursue threats for hundreds of kilometers. The moment their offspring made distress calls, every adult in a 50-kilometer radius would have been converging on your location with murderous intent." "Oh, they definitely came running," Rowan agreed. I could hear them crashing through the forest while I was working to free the cubs. Honestly, it was pretty motivating. Nothing makes you work faster than the sound of angry parents coming to rescue their kids. Corvin made a small whimpering sound. You could hear them approaching. And you stayed? Well, I wasn't going to abandon the cubs. They were counting on me at that point. They were counting on you, Grix said slowly. The babies of the galaxy's most dangerous predator species. We're counting on you to save them from the wreckage of your own crashed ship, while their homicidal parents were charging through the forest toward you. That's about the size of it, yes. The briefing room's environmental systems seemed inadequate to handle the collective stress breathing of 3 galactic security officers trying to process information that defied every known principle of survival and common sense. What happened when the adults arrived? Dr. Nathari asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan's face lit up with the kind of fond memory usually reserved for family gatherings or pleasant vacations. Oh, that was the interesting part. They came bursting through the underbrush, and I mean bursting. These things are massive, ready for a fight. But then they saw me with their cubs, and they just stopped. Stopped? Dead in their tracks. I think they were trying to figure out what I was doing. And what were you doing? Talking to the babies, mostly. You know how you talk to scared animals? Kind of sing-song, lots of "it's okay, sweetie," and "mommy's coming" type stuff. The cubs had stopped crying and were actually helping me figure out the best way to lift the tree branch without hurting anyone. Grix felt something that might have been the beginning of understanding, though it was an understanding that made them question the fundamental nature of reality. You were nurturing them. I guess that's one way to put it. I was just trying to keep them calm while I worked. And the adults interpreted this as protective behavior, I think. When I finally got the cubs free, they ran straight to their mothers, but then they kept looking back at me and making these little encouraging chirps. Encouraging chirps. Like they were trying to introduce me. It was actually pretty sweet. Dr. Nathari's form had gone completely transparent, a phenomenon that typically only occurred during severe logical paradox overload. Captain Rowan, she said faintly, you're suggesting that instead of viewing you as a threat to be eliminated, the Apex interpreted your actions as caretaking. I suppose so. I mean, actions speak louder than words, right? I was helping their babies, so I couldn't be all bad. This is impossible, Corvin muttered. This violates everything we know about apex predator behavior. Does it, though? Rowan asked, genuinely curious. I mean, most predators are pretty good at reading intentions, especially when it comes to their young. They can tell the difference between someone who's a threat and someone who's trying to help. But you're an alien species, Grix protested. How could they possibly interpret human behavior correctly? Maybe, Rowan said thoughtfully. Caring for babies is pretty universal. Maybe some things transcend species barriers. The idea hung in the air like a revelation wrapped in absurdity. The notion that maternal instinct, or in this case, the recognition of maternal instinct, might be one of those rare universal constants that crossed species lines. So what happened next? Dr. Nathari asked, her form slowly solidifying back into visibility. Well, that's when things got really interesting, Rowan said, settling back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone about to tell their favorite story. Grix exchanged glances with their colleagues and realized they were about to learn exactly how a human terraforming engineer had managed to turn certain death into an apparent vacation. Define interesting, they said weakly. Rowan grinned. The moms decided to adopt me. The silence that followed Rowan's casual announcement about apex adoption could have been weaponized. Dr. Nathari had gone completely invisible, a state usually reserved for encounters with paradoxes that threatened the fundamental structure of logic itself. Corvin appeared to be questioning not just his career choices, but possibly his entire understanding of how the universe operated. And Grix was beginning to suspect that their compound eyes might actually pop out of their head if they twitched any harder. Adopted, Grix repeated slowly, as if testing the word for hidden explosives. Well, maybe inducted into the pack is more accurate, Rowan said thoughtfully. Though there was definitely some maternal energy happening. You know how moms get when they meet someone who's good with their kids. No, Corvin said faintly. I really don't. Captain, Dr. Nathari said, her voice emerging from empty air like the ghost of logic past. I'm going to need you to explain this in considerably more detail, because what you're describing challenges approximately 18 different theories about apex predator social behavior. Sure, Rowan said brightly, though it might help if I start from the beginning. You know, paint the whole picture. Grix gestured weakly at the recording devices around the room. Please, paint away. Rowan settled back in her chair, coffee mug cradled in both hands, and began the kind of story that would either revolutionize xenobiology or get everyone in the room committed to a very comfortable, very secure facility. So there I was, crawling out of what used to be my ship. And, let me tell you, atmospheric processors are not designed for high-velocity impacts with ancient forest canopies. The whole thing was scattered across about half a kilometer of undergrowth, which was just fantastic for my insurance premiums. She paused to sip her coffee, apparently savoring both the beverage and the memory of nearly dying. First thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. You know that kind of silence you get right after something really dramatic happens? Like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard the chittering. The cubs, Dr. Nathari said, her form flickering back into partial visibility. 3 of them, trapped under this massive branch from a tree my ship had taken out on the way down. And they were scared. I mean really, genuinely terrified. There's something about the sound of frightened babies that just cuts right through your rational brain, you know? Actually, no. Most sentient species didn't know, because most sentient species had the good sense not to investigate distress calls from infant death machines. But Grix was beginning to realize that humans operated on a completely different frequency from the rest of the galaxy. I followed the sound through maybe 30 meters of crashed ship debris and broken trees, found them pinned under this branch that probably weighed more than my entire ship. They saw me coming and, well, they didn't exactly panic, but they weren't thrilled about it either. Rowan's expression grew fond, the way most beings looked when remembering their pets, not when recalling their first meeting with baby predators. They were beautiful, honestly. About the size of earth wolves, but with these incredible silver-blue coats and the most intelligent eyes I've ever seen. And they were trying so hard to be brave while they waited for help. Brave, Corvin repeated weakly. Oh, absolutely. They'd stopped crying when they heard me coming. I think they didn't want to attract any more attention to themselves. Smart babies. But I could see they were in pain. And here, Grix realized, was where human psychology diverged so sharply from galactic norm that it might as well have been a different species entirely. Where any reasonable being would see dangerous predator offspring, humans apparently saw babies in need of help. So I started talking to them, Rowan continued. Just basic reassurance stuff. Hey there, sweeties. It's going to be okay. Let's see what we can do about this branch. You know, the kind of thing you'd say to any scared kid. And they responded to this? Dr. Nathari asked, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her existential crisis. Oh, they were fascinated. I don't think they'd ever heard anything quite like human speech before. One of them, the smallest one, I started thinking of her as Little Bit, actually started making these soft chirping sounds back at me, like she was trying to have a conversation. The image of a human engineer having a chat with an apex cub was so fundamentally absurd that Grix felt reality itself might be developing stress fractures. How long did it take to free them? They managed to ask. About an hour and a half. The branch was wedged pretty thoroughly, and I had to be really careful not to hurt them while I worked. I ended up using some debris from my ship as leverage. Terraforming engineers learn a lot about moving heavy things. Turns out, that translates pretty well to emergency rescue operations. An hour and a half, Doctor, Nathari said, her form now fully visible and pulsing with incredulity. You spent an hour and a half in close proximity to apex cubs, during which time their parents would have been coming to investigate, yeah. I could hear them about 20 minutes in, crashing through the forest like furry freight trains. The sound was honestly terrifying, but the cubs seemed to perk up when they heard it, started making these excited little chirping calls. They were calling to their parents, Grix said, understanding dawning like a particularly unpleasant sunrise. While you were still there? Right. And I realized I had maybe 10 minutes before Mama and Papa showed up, ready to turn me into a very small pile of organic compounds. So I started talking to them about it. You talked to the cubs about their approaching parents. Sure, I told them. Okay, kids, your folks are coming, and they're probably going to be really upset about the whole trapped under a tree situation. So we need to have you free and safe before they get here. Okay? Things like that. The mental image of a human giving a pep talk to baby apex predators while their parents thundered through the forest was so surreal that Corvin actually started giggling, the kind of high-stressed giggling that usually preceded complete nervous breakdown. Did they understand you? Dr. Nathari asked, her scientific mind apparently seizing on the communication implications. I think so, at least partly. They definitely started working with me, instead of just waiting passively. When I finally got the leverage right and started lifting the branch, they coordinated their movements to wiggle out safely. It was actually pretty impressive problem-solving for babies. And then the adults arrived. Oh boy, did they ever. I'd just gotten the last cub free when I heard this sound like a spacecraft engine mixed with an earthquake. Looked up to see 3 adult apex bursting through the tree line. And let me tell you, they are significantly more impressive in person than in any of the training videos. Rowan paused, her expression growing thoughtful. They're huge, easily twice the size I was expecting. And fast. But the thing that really struck me was how intelligent they looked. Their eyes weren't just predator calculating. They were thinking. Really thinking. What did you do? Grix asked, morbid curiosity overcoming professional detachment. Well, I was still kneeling next to the cubs, who had immediately run over to their moms but kept looking back at me. So I just stayed put. Figured sudden movements would be a bad idea. You stayed put while 3 adult apex evaluated whether or not to kill you. I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds a lot more dramatic than it felt at the time. Mostly, I was just trying not to look threatening while also making sure the cubs knew I wasn't abandoning them. How does one look non-threatening to an apex? Dr. Nathari asked, with the kind of scientific fascination usually reserved for studying impossible phenomena. I made myself smaller, got down on all fours, kept my head low, made sure my hands were visible and empty. And I kept talking to the cubs, using the same gentle voice I'd been using all along. The room had gone completely still. Even the environmental systems seemed to be holding their breath. The adults just watched me for the longest time. I could feel them analyzing every movement, every sound. It was like being examined by the galaxy's most thorough and potentially fatal job interview panel. "How long did this evaluation last?" Grix asked. "Maybe 5 minutes?" Though it felt like about 3 years. Then Little Bit, the smallest cub, did something that changed everything. "What?" She came back over to me, chirped a few times, and then gently head-butted my shoulder. Right in front of her mother. The implications of that simple gesture hit the room like a small explosion. An apex cub had voluntarily approached a strange alien and displayed affection in full view of protective parents, and lived to tell about it. "What did the adults do?" Corvin asked in a whisper. Rowan's smile was radiant. The mother, Little Bit's mom, tilted her head and made this questioning rumble. Like she was asking her daughter, "Are you sure about this new friend?" And Little Bit chirped back and head-butted me again, more firmly this time. And the mother accepted this? She stepped closer. And I mean, when a creature that size steps toward you, every survival instinct you have starts screaming. But she just sniffed me carefully, paying special attention to my hands. I guess she could smell that I'd been gentle with her baby. Dr. Nethery had gone completely rigid, her crystalline form locked in perfect stillness. "Captain, you're describing behavioral patterns that suggest these creatures have social structures far more complex than we've ever documented." "Oh, they absolutely do. What happened next proved that, beyond any doubt." "What happened next?" Grix asked, though they weren't entirely sure they wanted to know. The mother made this low, thrumming sound, almost like a purr, and then did something I'll never forget. Rowan's voice grew soft with memory. She very gently pressed her nose against my forehead. For just a moment. Then she stepped back and made a different sound to the other adults. What kind of sound? Like she was introducing me. And suddenly, all 3 cubs were clustering around me again, and the adults were, well, they were treating me like I belonged there. The silence that followed was the kind that usually accompanied profound shifts in understanding. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Grix was beginning to realize they weren't just dealing with an impossible survival story. They were looking at first contact with a species that might be far more sophisticated than anyone had ever imagined. "That was just the beginning," Rowan continued, apparently oblivious to the minor revolution she was causing in galactic xenobiology. "What happened over the next 2 days was even more incredible." "There's more?" Corvin asked weakly. "Oh, so much more. That's when I really got to see how their society works. And let me tell you, it's nothing like what the textbooks say." Grix realized they were going to need significantly more coffee for this conversation. By this point, Grix had given up any pretense of maintaining professional composure. Their compound eyes had stopped twitching, mainly because they'd moved beyond surprise into a kind of numb acceptance that the universe was apparently run by cosmic comedians with a very twisted sense of humor. "Captain Rowan," they said carefully, "when you say their society is nothing like the textbooks describe—" "I mean they have politics," Rowan said cheerfully. "Actual, honest-to-goodness political structures, territorial agreements, resource-sharing protocols, even what I can only describe as diplomatic relations between different family groups. Dr. Nathari flickered back into full visibility, her scientific excitement overriding her logical crisis. You observed intergroup negotiations? Oh, I didn't just observe them. I participated in them. The coffee mug in Corvin's hands made a small cracking sound. You see, the family group that adopted me, and yes, Dr. Nathari, I'm using that term advisedly, they're apparently pretty important in the local hierarchy. Little Bit's grandmother is what I can only describe as a matriarch. Think tribal elder crossed with Supreme Court justice, but with more teeth and better environmental policies. Rowan paused to finish her coffee, apparently savoring the memory of interspecies diplomacy conducted in a language of growls and chirps. The second day, grandmother, that's what I started calling her, took me on what I realized was basically a diplomatic tour. We visited 3 other family territories, and each time she introduced me with these elaborate vocalizations that I'm pretty sure were the apex equivalent of, "This is our new weird pet human. Please don't eat her." Did the other groups accept this introduction? Dr. Nathari asked, her form pulsing with scientific fascination. With varying degrees of enthusiasm. The first group was curious. Lots of sniffing, some tentative head bumps from the cubs. The second group was more cautious, but polite. The third group, Rowan grinned. The third group had questions. Questions? Grix asked weakly. Well, challenges, really. The matriarch of the third group seemed to think that having a pet alien was either a sign of weakness or some kind of territorial power play. So she demanded a demonstration. A demonstration of what? My usefulness to the pack. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Grix realized they were about to learn how a human terraforming engineer had proven her worth to a society of apex predators. I should mention, Rowan continued conversationally, that apex cubs learn to hunt by practicing on small prey. Nothing life-threatening, just coordination exercises with quick, agile creatures that are hard to catch. And they asked you to participate in a hunt, Dr. Nathari said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not exactly. They asked me to teach the cubs how to hunt better. Corvin made a sound like a deflating balloon. They wanted hunting lessons from a human. Turns out, human persistence hunting techniques are actually really complementary to apex pack strategies. They're ambush predators primarily, but their cubs needed to learn patience and coordination. I spent about 3 hours teaching them a modified version of endurance tracking. The mental image of a human conducting hunting seminars for baby apex predators was so fundamentally absurd that Grix felt their worldview completing its transition from orderly universe to cosmic joke. Did it work? They asked, because apparently they were committed to this madness now. Oh, it worked beautifully. By the end of the session, the cubs were coordinating their movements like they'd been training together for months. The third group's matriarch was so impressed, she offered me a permanent position as hunting instructor. She offered you a job, Corvin said faintly. Well, more like pack membership with specialized responsibilities. The Apex take education very seriously, apparently. Good teachers are valued members of the community. Dr. Nathari had begun pulsing so rapidly she was practically strobing. Captain, do you realize what you're describing? You've documented evidence of advanced social organization, educational systems, intergroup politics, and complex communication structures. This could revolutionize our understanding of apex predator species across the galaxy. Oh, that's not even the best part, Rowan said brightly. Grix felt something that might have been their sanity, making one last desperate attempt to hold on. There's a best part? The apex want to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. The silence that followed was so complete that it had its own gravitational field. Diplomatic relations, Grix repeated slowly. Full contact protocols, trade agreements, the whole package. Grandmother was very specific about it. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here because apex predator political discourse is apparently very complex, that humans are the first species they've encountered that seem to understand proper child-rearing techniques. Child-rearing techniques. They're impressed by our nurturing instincts. Apparently, most species that crash on their world either run away screaming or try to fight their way out. We're the first ones who stopped to help their babies. Dr. Nathari had gone completely transparent again. Somewhere in the crystalline void of her shock, her voice emerged like the ghost of logic future. They want to make contact because humans are good with children. That, and they think we might be useful for teaching their young about other species. Cultural exchange programs, you know? They're very interested in expanding their cubs' educational opportunities. Grix stared at Rowan for a long moment, trying to process the idea that humanity had apparently passed some kind of cosmic parenting test administered by the galaxy's most dangerous predators. "Captain," they said carefully, "when you say they want formal contact." "Oh, I'm supposed to arrange it," Rowan said casually. "I've been appointed as the official human apex cultural liaison. First of my kind, according to Grandmother. Pretty exciting, really." "You've been appointed," Corvin managed, "by a council of apex predator matriarchs to establish interspecies diplomatic relations based on your demonstrated babysitting skills. That's about the size of it, yes. The briefing room's environmental systems were definitely not designed to handle the collective stress breathing of 3 galactic security officers simultaneously experiencing existential crisis. There is one small thing, though," Rowan added, with the casual tone of someone mentioning a minor scheduling conflict. "What?" Grix asked, though they were beginning to suspect they didn't want to know. "Well, as a gesture of good faith and to cement the alliance, the matriarchs decided to send some cultural ambassadors back with me." Cultural ambassadors. 3 eggs, to be precise. I'm supposed to raise them as sort of exchange students. Give them a chance to learn about human society while they grow up. The crack in Corvin's coffee mug widened into a web of fractures. "You have apex eggs," Dr. Nathari said, her voice emerging from the void of impossibility. "Had. They hatched during the trip up here. Cutest little things you've ever seen, all fluffy and chirpy and absolutely fascinated by spaceship noises. They're currently napping in my quarters, but they should be waking up soon. They get cranky if they don't eat every few hours." Grix felt the last vestiges of their ordered worldview crumble into cosmic dust. "Captain Rowan, are you telling me that there are currently 3 baby apex predators on this station?" "Well, yes. But don't worry. They're very well behaved. Grandmother made sure they understood proper space station etiquette before I left." Space station etiquette. No hunting other passengers, no territorial marking in public areas, that sort of thing. Basic manners. And there it was, the final perfect absurdity that transformed this from a survival story into a complete redefinition of humanity's place in the galaxy. They'd become the universe's first interspecies childcare service, apparently by accident. "I should probably mention," Rowan added thoughtfully, "the matriarchs are expecting regular progress reports on the cubs' development, and they'd like to arrange a formal diplomatic summit sometime in the next few months." Grix looked around the briefing room, noting that Dr. Nathari had achieved complete invisibility again. Corvin was staring at his cracked coffee mug like it contained the secrets of the universe, and their own reflection in the polished table surface showed a being who had clearly given up all hope of understanding how reality worked. "Captain Rowan," they said finally, "I think you've just accidentally made humanity the galaxy's first apex predator diplomats." "Accidentally? You mean this was intentional?" Rowan's smile was radiant. "Commander, I'm a terraforming engineer. My job is to make impossible worlds habitable for human colonization. Turns out, making friends with the local apex predators is just good business." And that, Grix realized with a mixture of horror and admiration, was exactly the kind of uniquely human logic that would probably end up revolutionizing galactic politics. From down the corridor, a series of soft, chirping sounds drifted through the air, the contented noises of well-fed baby apex predators settling in for their afternoon nap. The sound had an immediate effect on Rowan, whose entire demeanor shifted into what could only be described as concerned parent mode. She tilted her head, listening intently to the chirping patterns. "Oh, that's not sleepy chirping," she said, standing up with sudden urgency. "That's we're awake and exploring chirping, which means—" Her eyes widened slightly. "They've probably figured out how to open their containment area." As if summoned by her words, the chirping sounds grew closer, accompanied by the distinctive click-click-click of tiny claws on metal decking. "Captain," Grix said slowly, "please tell me those sounds aren't coming from the ventilation system." "Oh, no. They wouldn't use the vents," Rowan said, cheerfully, then paused. "At least, I don't think they would. They're still learning about three-dimensional spaces." Corvin's ears had gone so flat against his skull, they were practically part of his scalp. "Ma'am, are you saying there are currently 3 uncontained baby apex predators loose on this station?" "Not loose, exactly. More like independently mobile." The chirping sounds were definitely getting closer, and now they were accompanied by what sounded suspiciously like multiple sets of small feet padding down the corridor at increasing speed. "They're coming this way," Dr. Nathari observed, her form flickering between visible and transparent in rapid succession. "Of course they are," Rowan said fondly. "They can smell me. Cubs always want to check in with their caregiver when they wake up in a new place." "Their caregiver," Grix repeated faintly, just as the briefing room doors slid open to reveal 3 of the most adorable apocalypses the galaxy had ever seen. Grix buried their face in their hands and wondered if their insurance covered stress-related compound eye replacement surgery, and possibly early retirement due to xenobiological impossibility exposure. "So," Rowan said brightly, as 3 baby apex predators bounded into the room with obvious delight, "who wants to meet the kids?"